ADX Florence, the most notorious Supermax prison in the United States. This is where the federal government keeps those they call the most dangerous of the dangerous. 23 hours a day inside a concrete cell. No sunlight, no conversations. From the Mexican kingpin who escaped prison twice, to a feared gang leader from New York. Who will be number one on this list? Number 1. James Little Jimmy Marcello, Chicago outfit. Inside the concrete tomb of ADX Florence, where a single day feels like a year, sits an aging mobster waiting out the rest of his life. James Little Jimmy Marcello. On the streets, he once looked like a regular city employee. White shirt, neatly combed hair. But looks were deceiving. Behind that image was a man prosecutors said pulled strings for the Chicago outfit, the Mafia organization that once ruled the city. Born in 1943, Marcello did not rise through books or schools. He started out as a driver, a loyal foot soldier for the bosses before him. Outfit rules had long required Italian blood. Yet Marcello, with an Irish mother, was believed to have climbed the ranks through cold discipline and loyalty. His name became tied to an event that shocked America, the fatal attack on brothers Tony and Michael Spilotro in 1986. They once dominated Las Vegas, later inspiring characters in the film Casino. In real life, FBI records showed Marcello was among those coordinating the move. The incident sent a clear message. Anyone the outfit considered out of line would be erased. In 1995, during a smaller trial, Marcello told the court, "If my name wasn't James Marcello, I wouldn't be standing in front of you." It reflected his belief that his family name itself put him under FBI scrutiny. But in 2005, everything collapsed. Operation Family Secrets began. For the first time, a hitman named Nicholas Calabrese broke ranks, testifying about multiple homicides. After 2 years in court, in 2007 a jury convicted Marcello under ERICO charges. The heaviest blow came in 2009 when Judge James Zagel handed down a life sentence and said, "You will pay for your crimes. I regret you did not live a better life." Marcello stayed silent. That silence followed him into AD. One unusual courtroom twist came in 2012. While Marcello was appealing, the Bureau of Prisons suddenly moved him out of Chicago. Judge Zagel was furious, ordering him returned immediately. A rare move that showed just how sensitive this case remained. Beyond the court files, Marcello's life was marked by the outfit's shadow. His father was killed in the 1970s, the body found inside a steel drum. A longtime girlfriend testified she received steady cash from him. These were not the marks of a legend, but reminders that crime always brings loss and broken lives. Now, Marcello sits inside ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. 23 hours a day locked in concrete, a thin slot of light pointing toward the sky, steel doors opening only from afar. Letters are screened. Every call is monitored. No more Chicago, no more soldiers, only endless time and a life sentence without escape. For the law, it was justice. For the victims' families, it was a long-delayed price. For Marcello, it was the end of a lifetime bound to the outfit. But if Little Jimmy represents the silent danger, in the Bronx there was someone entirely different. A man known by the name Pistol Pete, Peter Rollock. A figure who turned his nickname into a symbol of fear on the streets of the Bronx. Number 2. Peter Pistol Pete Rollock, sex money murder. The Bronx, New York in the 1980s was unforgiving. Old housing projects, dark stairwells, gunfire, and drugs filling the alleys. That was where Peter Rollock grew up. People called him Pistol Pete. A simple nickname, but one tied to the gun he always carried. While many teenagers were still looking for a place to play ball, Rollock was already learning to survive through the fear he cast over others. Out of a group of neighborhood youths, he built sex money murder. 3 words that became a brutal motto. Under Rollock, SMM spread like wildfire. His followers called him their leader. Rivals stayed away. Police records linked the crew to shootings and homicides, but proving who gave the orders was difficult. On the Bronx streets, many believed one nod from Pistol Pete could seal someone's fate. He rarely spoke much, but his influence echoed through every move his soldiers made. By the 1990s, his reach grew. Not just in the streets, but even inside New York prisons. The name Pistol Pete rallied his crew. Community groups described him as a new generation boss who turned street violence into organized discipline. What worried authorities most was his silence. He did not need to shout. He did not even need to appear. His men still followed. By the early 2000s, the law tightened its grip. The FBI launched a sweeping operation. Undercover agents infiltrated the crew, phones were tapped, and followers turned witness. In court, the evidence piled high. $1 million drug operations, fatal attacks, testimony that Rollock had given the orders. In the end, Rollock was sentenced to life without parole. But more than that, he was placed under SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. It meant total isolation, 23 hours a day in concrete, 1 hour in a tiny yard the size of a box, every letter, every call, heavily monitored. Authorities feared even one message could spark new violence outside. ADX Florence, Colorado, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Here, Pistol Pete has no Bronx, no followers, only cold walls, fluorescent lights that never turn off, and days that feel endless. For the communities once terrorized under sex money murder, his name remains a reminder. Street power, no matter how fierce, always ends in silence behind prison walls. Number 3. Ronald "Raw Diggs" Herron, Brooklyn Bloodset, Brooklyn, New York. Gowanus was once known as one of the toughest corners of the borough. Red brick housing projects, graffiti on every wall, standing silent amid gunfire and the haze of drugs. From there rose a man who blended violence with spectacle. Ronald Herron. Known on the streets as Raw Diggs. He was not only a gang leader, he turned the image of a street boss into his own brand. In underground rap tracks, he boasted about drugs, power, and violence, as if they were badges of honor. On YouTube videos, Raw Diggs painted himself as untouchable. Young men in Brooklyn cheered him and seen his crew treated him like a kingpin, but that arrogance made him target number 1 for law enforcement. For years, the FBI and NYPD built their case. They tracked drug operations, collected messages, and flipped insiders who turned against him. Court filings connected Herron to 3 homicides. Prosecutors even played his own rap videos to the jury. What he bragged about on stage became a confession in court. Few imagined an aspiring artist would turn his music into evidence against himself. In 2014, the verdict came down. Ronald Herron, also known as Raw Diggs, received life in prison plus 105 years. The judge called him a man lost in delusion, glorifying violence and exploiting street tragedies to promote a career. In that moment, the glow of street fame collapsed. The crowd that once hailed him saw only a handcuffed prisoner being led away. But the story did not end there. Herron was transferred to ADX Florence, Colorado, known as the most secure prison in America. Here, street legends mean nothing. No microphone, no cameras, no applause, only 4 walls of concrete, a steel door locked tight, and fluorescent lights that never turn off. 23 hours a day in isolation, 1 hour in a small outdoor cage, where even the sky is cut into pieces by metal bars. Inside those walls, the name Raw Diggs echoes only in the memories of Brooklyn streets. His rap videos still exist online, but now they serve as evidence of his downfall, not his fame. For the young men who once idolized him, this ending is a warning. The streets may crown you for a moment, but justice can bury you forever. ADX Florence does not care if you are a rapper, a gang boss, or a so-called icon. Inside, every prisoner is the same. Silent, alone, locked inside a box of concrete. And Ronald "Raw Diggs" Herron, once standing proud on stage, Joe, is now only another name in the shadows of Supermax. Number 4. Omar OG Mack Portee, United Blood Nation, New York in the early 1990s. Rikers Island was a pressure cooker ready to blow. Latin kings and Nitas dominated the yards. Many black inmates were pushed into a corner. In that chaos, Omar Portee, known as OG Mack, created something that would change the East Coast gang landscape forever. United Blood Nation. Born in 1969, raised in the Bronx, Portee grew up with poverty, violence, and few options. At Rikers, he realized one thing. To survive, he needed his own organization. In 1993, alongside Leonard "Deadeye" McKenzie, he united smaller groups, building UBN, an East Coast version of the Bloods. From behind bars, he wrote the rules, divided the sets, and used fear to enforce discipline. Soon, UBN spread beyond Rikers, into the Bronx, Harlem, and far beyond. UBN thrived by blending prison power with street recruitment. They pulled members from schools and corners, funneling young people into the gang machine. Portee became known as the Big Homie, the man shaping every move. But the price of that power came fast. By the late 90s, NYPD and the FBI began gathering evidence: heroin and cocaine trafficking, extortion, and homicide orders that prosecutors said traced back to Portee himself. On August 27, 2002, Portee stood trial in federal court, facing 10 charges: racketeering, murder conspiracy, drug trafficking, credit card fraud. Prosecutors painted him as a gang boss who wrote letters from prison sending commands that led to violence outside. The most damaging blow came from inside his own ranks. Former loyal members testified against him, a betrayal that sealed his fate. By April 2003, Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald sentenced him to 50 years in federal prison. She said plainly that Portee had lured young men into violence and that only a long sentence could stop him. His prisoner number 30063-037 is now tied to ADX Florence, Colorado, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Federal authorities consider him highly dangerous, a founder of a violent empire born inside prison walls. A man believed capable of sending orders with just a few lines on paper. Inside ADX, Portee spends 23 hours a day in a solitary cell. 1 hour in a concrete yard barely larger than a cage. His outside contact is reduced to almost nothing. On the streets, OG Mack remains a symbolic figure. But to the government, he is just another shadow on a long list of men who once turned prison into a launch pad for power. His presence in ADX is a reminder that gangs do not always start on the streets. Some are born behind bars, and just as they rise inside prison, they can also end there. For Omar OG Mack Portee, that paradox defines his life. His earliest possible release is in the year 2044, if he survives long enough to see the door open. Number 5. Luis Felipe King Blood, Latin Kings. In 1980, as tens of thousands of Cubans arrived in America during the Mariel boat lift, one man also set foot in New York: Luis Felipe. Born in 1962 in Havana, he carried no wealth, only a violent instinct to survive. Before long, in the struggling streets of the Bronx, Felipe began building a new empire. People called him King Blood, the founder of the New York branch of the Latin Kings. The Latin Kings had roots in Chicago, but under Felipe, the New York faction exploded in size. He wrote a constitution for the gang, laying down rules that mixed loyalty with ruthless orders. To many young Latinos, King Blood became a symbol of power. But to law enforcement, he was one of the greatest threats. Even from prison, Felipe sent instructions through handwritten notes, turning scraps of paper into tools of fear. By the mid-90s, homicides linked to the Latin Kings stacked up. Federal prosecutors alleged that Felipe ordered at least 7 killings while behind bars. The evidence included handwritten letters, smuggled out through secret channels. In 1995, he was convicted of racketeering, homicide, and running a criminal enterprise. 2 years later, on February 14, 1997, Judge John S. Martin Jr. handed down his sentence: life in prison plus 45 years. But what made history was the condition attached. Felipe was placed under permanent solitary confinement. No contact with other inmates, no letters, no phone calls, no visits, except for lawyers and a few family members cleared by the court. Every scrap of paper and every call was screened. The judge declared he has forfeited his right to human contact. In American justice, it was rare to see such harsh restrictions written directly into a sentence. Felipe became a symbol of extreme measures, proof that some individuals were deemed too dangerous to exist in society, even within prison walls. Today, Luis Felipe is serving time at ADX Florence, Colorado. 4 cold concrete walls, lights that never go dark, silence stretching without end. 23 hours a day alone. 1 hour in a small recreation yard with no one else nearby. For many inmates, ADX is a living hell. For Felipe, it is punishment layered upon punishment. Solitude itself turned into law. From an unknown refugee, Luis Felipe built the Latin Kings in New York, spreading power through fear and violence. But that power now lies buried inside a tiny cell. No more followers, no more chance of loyalty. Only the long silence of a life sentence, with no way back. Number 6. Tyler the Hulk Bingham, Aryan Brotherhood. Inside the federal prison system, the name Aryan Brotherhood carries a chill. A white supremacist gang thriving on knives, drugs, and fear. At its highest level, only a handful of men had the authority to guide its deadly machinery. Among them was Tyler Davis Bingham, known as the Hulk. Born in 1947, raised in the American West, Bingham grew up around violence and racism. He turned to crime early. Once inside the federal system, he quickly rose through the Aryan Brotherhood. His nickname reflected both his massive build and his brutal reputation. When Barry Mills rose to lead the group, Bingham became his right hand, one of only two men running the AB from the shadows. Through the 1980s and 90s, the Aryan Brotherhood extended control across the federal prisons nationwide. Orders were passed through coded letters, secret signals, even ink made from homemade chemicals, words appearing only when heated. In one infamous case, prosecutors seized a hidden message from Bingham at USP Lewisburg, described as a declaration of war against a rival group known as the DC Blacks. To the government, it was proof that the Brotherhood could turn scraps of paper into lethal weapons. In 2002, the Department of Justice launched one of the largest RICO cases in history, targeting the AB leadership. Bingham, Mills, and others were charged with directing at least 16 killings inside federal prisons. In Santa Ana, California, 2006, they went on trial. Jurors heard testimony about how Bingham ordered attacks from his cell, how coded letters left prison walls, and how men died in silence, leaving behind only signs of organized violence. Facing the death penalty, Bingham showed little emotion. His silence, witnesses said, was more chilling than any words. In July 2006, the jury returned guilty verdicts for racketeering and homicide. But in the death penalty phase, they split. 8 jurors favored life, 4 voted for execution. The result meant no death sentence. In January 2007, Judge David O. Carter handed down 3 consecutive life sentences, for Bingham. Barry Mills received 4. For the government, it was still a historic victory. For the first time, the 2 top leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood were locked away permanently. Today, Tyler the Hulk Bingham remains at ADX Florence, Colorado, a place where former prison warlords are sealed inside concrete cells, 23 hours a day, with no conversations, no coded messages, no secret notes, only cold lights and endless walls. Yet even now, among inmates, the name Bingham carries weight, a reminder that power can be built even in solitary confinement, and that silence, at times, can be more dangerous than a shout. Number 7. Kaboni Savage, Philadelphia in the early 2000s. The streets of North Philly lived in fear of one name: Kaboni Savage. Once a professional boxer, he traded gloves for the role of cocaine kingpin. With a drug network stretching across the city, Savage built not just a business, but a reputation for ruthless retaliation. The darkest chapter came in 2004. When a former associate turned government witness, Savage sent his message with fire. In the dead of night, an arson attack claimed the lives of several members of that witness's family, including children. The memory scarred Philadelphia forever. To the community, it was not just violence. It was a warning. Challenge Savage, and the price was death. The FBI later called it one of the most vicious witness intimidation cases in federal history. Years later, the wall of silence around Savage began to crack. Wiretaps, insider testimony, and evidence from the fire made their way into court. In 2013, a federal jury in Philadelphia convicted him on 17 counts, including 12 killings tied to RICO charges. Judge Richard Surik handed down 13 separate death sentences. A rare moment in 21st century America where a single defendant faced that many death penalties at once. Savage sat in silence, but the verdict rang like the final bell for his empire. It seemed the story was sealed. Yet nearly 2 decades later, another twist came. In December 2024, the federal government announced commutations for dozens of death row inmates. On that list was Kaboni Savage. His sentences were reduced to life without parole. Many called it controversial. The burned house in North Philly still haunted families, but the law had spoken. Savage would live the rest of his life behind bars. Today, he is housed at ADX Florence, Colorado, the federal Supermax for the most dangerous inmates, 23 hours a day inside a concrete cell. 1 hour in a narrow yard where the sky is broken by razor wire. No street power, no boxing lights, no loyal crew, only a name carved deep into legal history: Kaboni Savage. Once the man who terrified Philadelphia. now buried in endless silence. Number 8. Alfredo El Mochomo, Beltrán-Leyva, Beltrán-Leyva Organization, Culiacán, January 2008. In the heart of Sinaloa cartel territory, Mexican soldiers stormed a house. Their cameras captured a man in handcuffs. His name, Alfredo Beltrán-Leyva, nicknamed El Mochomo, a figure tied to violence, money, and the collapse of an empire. Born in 1971 in Badiraguato, Alfredo grew up in the land where drug trafficking was seen as a family trade. Together with 3 brothers, he built the Beltrán-Leyva organization, first as allies of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. But in the world of cartels, loyalty never lasts. Alfredo's arrest lit the fuse for a bloody split between BLO and the Sinaloa cartel, a war that shook Mexico. The day he was captured, authorities seized nearly $1 million in cash from his home. Mexican media called it the biggest blow yet to the Beltrán-Leyva organization. But to cartel insiders, the message was bigger. No one, not even the Beltrán-Leyva family, was untouchable. After 6 years in Mexican custody, Alfredo was extradited to the United States in late 2014. In Washington, February 2016, Alfredo stood before a federal court and pleaded guilty. Conspiracy to ship tons of cocaine and methamphetamine into America. Prosecutors described him as a major link in the pipeline moving drugs from South America to North America. In April 2017, the sentence came down. Life without parole, along with a forfeiture order of $529.2 million. A symbolic figure representing BLO's massive profits. The Department of Justice called him one of the most ruthless traffickers, declaring the court had sent a clear message. No cartel boss was beyond justice. From that day, Alfredo was transferred to ADX Florence, Colorado, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. From commanding hundreds of armed men, he now spends 23 hours each day locked in a cell 2 by 3 meters wide, with only a sliver of light cutting across the floor. His world reduced to steel doors, white walls, and silence. There is a bitter paradox. The fall of Alfredo weakened BLO, but it also fueled the rise of rival cartels, plunging Mexico into even deeper violence. He vanished into prison, yet the echoes of his empire still haunt Culiacán. ADX Florence is the final chapter for El Mochomo, once hailed as the brain of the Beltrán-Leyva organization, now left with no power, no fortune. Only the long shadow of isolation, aging behind concrete walls. Proof that violence never buys immortality. Number 9. Dairo Antonio Otoniel Úsuga, Clan del Golfo, Necoclí, Colombia. A poor town on the Caribbean coast, where a boy named Dairo Antonio Úsuga was born in 1971. His childhood was marked by war and weapons. While other kids went to school, Úsuga joined the left-wing FARC guerrillas, but his loyalty was never political. When money looked better on the other side, he left FARC for the right-wing paramilitary group AUC, notorious for massacres. From that moment, he learned a hard truth. Real power came from guns and money. In the early 2000s, alongside his brother Juan de Dios, Úsuga founded the Urabeños, later renamed Clan del Golfo. From the jungles of Urabá, the group rose to become Colombia's most powerful cartel after Medellín and Cali collapsed. They controlled routes moving tons of cocaine through Central America and Mexico, then north into the United States and across the Atlantic to Europe. Otoniel ruled as supreme leader, backed by ruthless violence and a bribery network reaching from local police to national officials. In 2012, Juan de Dios was killed. Otoniel became Jefe Máximo, commanding thousands of armed men. The FBI and DEA offered millions for his capture, calling Clan del Golfo a global drug trafficking enterprise. Yet, for nearly a decade, Otoniel vanished into the Colombian jungle, surfacing only in rare photos with an AK rifle in hand. On October 23, 2021, Operation Osiris began. More than 500 soldiers, helicopters, and satellite surveillance closed in on the Urabá Mountains. At last, Otoniel was taken alive. Images of him kneeling, hands cuffed behind his back, were broadcast on national television. Colombia's president declared, "This is the hardest blow against drug trafficking since Pablo Escobar." In May 2022, Otoniel was extradited to the United States. But under a special agreement, Colombia refused to allow a life sentence. So despite his crimes, he escaped permanent imprisonment. In January 2023, in federal court in Brooklyn, Otoniel pleaded guilty to leading a vast drug trafficking organization. He agreed to forfeit $216 million. In August 2023, the judge handed down his sentence. 45 years in federal prison. Otoniel stood, saying only, "I take responsibility and apologize for what I have done." The words could not erase the thousands of lives scarred by his empire, but they marked the end of a trial watched worldwide. Now, Otoniel is held at ADX Florence, Colorado. From dense Colombian jungles to a concrete box, 4 white walls, a steel door weighing hundreds of pounds. 23 hours in isolation, 1 hour in a yard no bigger than a cage. At over 50 years old, his sentence all but ensures he will die behind bars. His story reveals a harsh reality. From guerrilla fighter to paramilitary to global cartel boss, Otoniel climbed every rung through money and violence. Yet all paths ended the same way. Supermax, where the title Kingpin carries no weight, only silence without end. Number 10. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, Sinaloa Cartel, July 2015. Security cameras at Altiplano prison in Mexico showed Joaquín Guzmán, known worldwide as El Chapo, stepping into the shower. He sat down, and then vanished. Guards opened the cell to find a tunnel more than 1 mile long, complete with rails, lights, and ventilation. Guzmán had escaped the country's highest security prison. The world was stunned. But it was not the first time. In 2001, he fled Puente Grande prison by hiding inside a laundry cart, slipping through weak security. Twice he proved that no Mexican prison could hold him. Only extradition to the United States would close the chapter. Born in 1957 in Badiraguato, Sinaloa, Guzmán grew up poor and entered crime early. From small-time smuggling, he built the Sinaloa Cartel into the world's most powerful drug empire. According to U.S. court records, his organization moved hundreds of tons of cocaine, heroin, meth, and fentanyl into the United States. Tunnels under the border, hidden trucks, small planes, all used to flood America with drugs. But the cartel spread more than narcotics. It fueled violence across Mexico. Cities like Juarez and Culiacán became war zones. Residents lived in fear. Businesses were extorted. Communities were torn apart by addiction and overdoses. Guzmán's multi-billion-dollar empire stood on broken families and a destabilized nation. After his 2015 escape, Guzmán remained free for only months. In January 2016, Mexican Marines captured him in Los Mochis after a bloody gun battle. A year later, in January 2017, he was extradited to New York. His federal trial in Brooklyn lasted 3 months. Former associates testified, revealing cartel secrets. On February 12, 2019, a jury convicted him on all 10 counts, including running a continuing criminal enterprise. A mandatory life sentence. On July 17, 2019, Judge Brian Cogan issued the sentence, life plus 30 years, along with a forfeiture order of $12.6 billion. The U.S. Department of Justice called it a historic victory in the fight against drug trafficking. Guzmán was sent directly to ADX Florence, Colorado, the Supermax prison for America's most dangerous. There, Guzmán lives inside a cell 2 by 3 meters wide, 23 hours under watch, 1 hour in a cage-sized yard, the sky cut into pieces by razor wire. He is under SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. Every call, every letter, every visit, strictly monitored. In early 2023, Guzmán sent an SOS to Mexico's president, complaining of isolation and lack of sunlight. In 2024, he wrote to a New York court, saying he had gone 7 months without calling his children, asking for visitation rights for his wife. The judge denied the request, citing prison authority. By the summer of 2025, Guzmán filed another motion in Colorado, calling ADX conditions cruel and unusual. Every plea was rejected. Now in his 60s, the man who twice escaped Mexican prisons is buried inside America's Supermax. No more tunnels, no more songs glorifying his name. Only silence, concrete walls, and fluorescent light. El Chapo stands as proof. No matter how vast the empire, the end of crime is always the same. A small cell, with no way out. Number 11. Pedro Gutierrez, 9 Trey Gangsters, Charlotte, summer of 2011. Inside the prison corridors of North Carolina, a short command was given. All-out war. Just 2 words, and 5 different facilities erupted in violence. For 6 months, the entire system was under lockdown, and the shockwaves even spilled into the streets. Behind it all was Pedro Gutierrez, known as Magoo. The FBI identified him as a senior leader of the United Blood Nation and the 9 Trey set. Gutierrez grew up in the Bronx, where the Bloods had already taken root. He began as a street-level member, climbed the ranks, and eventually claimed the chairmanship of UBN, the highest seat on the governing council. One FBI agent said, "No one was above him. He controlled the top structure of the organization." From a prison cell, he could still move thousands of followers outside with a single order. What frightened officials most was how he maintained power. Even while serving time with the New York Department of Corrections, he collected gang dues, issued rules, and directed money through intermediaries in North Carolina. Funds were tied to tax fraud and identity theft schemes. Every note, every coded phrase could carry an order. And the 9 Trey set, the most violent wing of the Bloods, was the flag he raised highest. His conflict with a rival known as Pretty Tony became a turning point. Gutierrez ordered an attack, and fights spread through the units. Inmates clashed, officers rushed in to regain control, and retaliation surfaced in the community as well. State officials had no choice but to enforce a complete lockdown. For 6 months, 5 prisons stayed sealed, a reminder of how dangerous one gang leader could be, even behind bars. But no one outruns the law forever. In 2017, a federal jury indicted nearly 80 members of UBN, with Gutierrez named as a central figure. The trial in Charlotte was so tense that jurors had to remain anonymous. Prosecutors described him as a man running the entire empire from inside prison. The outcome? 20 years in federal prison to run consecutively after his state sentence. Judge Frank Whitney, as he delivered the sentence, said, "I wish I could give longer." He recommended that Gutierrez be confined at ADX Florence, America's Supermax, where every sound is buried beneath layers of steel and concrete. Today, his name appears on the list of ADX inmates, with a projected release date of October 16, 2034. Inside a cell barely 6 by 9 feet, he sits alone 23 hours each day. The steel door opens only when 4 officers escort him. The sky appears only through a narrow slit. An empire that once reached 7,000, even 15,000 members, is now reduced to silence inside one concrete box. For the law, this was justice. For the communities that endured the violence of UBN, it was a reminder that no leader is untouchable. And for Pedro Gutierrez, the name Magoo, once feared across yards and street corners, now exists only in the records of the Supermax. And if Gutierrez represents the corporate style of power, running an empire from a box of concrete, the next figure shows another path. A cold assassin tied to the Genovese family who turned contract killings into a profession. Number 12. Fotios Freddy Gayas, Genovese hitter. Hazleton, West Virginia, late October 2018. Just hours after James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston boss, was transferred into the prison, he was attacked inside his cell and did not survive. Among the prime suspects, one name stood out. Fotios Freddy Gayas, the Springfield enforcer once tied to the Genovese family. He neither admitted nor denied involvement, but those who knew him all said the same. Freddy despised informants. Born in 1967 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Freddy could never become a made man because he lacked direct Italian bloodlines, but that did not stop him from serving as a trusted hitter for the Springfield crew. Alongside his younger brother Ty, Freddy entered the underworld with cold efficiency and strict discipline, bound by loyalty to Omerta, the code of silence. When Arthur Nigro, the acting boss of the Genovese family, needed a job done, the Gayas brothers were always available. On November 23, 2003, Adolfo Big Al Bruno, a high-ranking Genovese representative in Springfield, was shot down on the street. Freddy and Ty did not pull the trigger, but they planned the hit. They recruited shooter Frankie Roche and organized every step. Not long after, Gary Westerman, suspected of cooperating with law enforcement, disappeared. Investigators later concluded that the Gayas crew was responsible. 2 violent messages in a row, both carrying the same warning. Those labeled as traitors would not survive. The FBI spent nearly 8 years tightening the net. In April 2011, a federal jury in Manhattan convicted Arthur Nigro, Freddy, and Ty Gayas on multiple charges linked to organized crime, including the Bruno and Westerman cases. In September of that year, Freddy was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. The press called him the Springfield hitman for the Genovese, a man without official rank, but feared all the same. It might have ended there, but fate added another chapter. In October 2018, Whitey Bulger, once an FBI informant, was transferred to USP Hazleton. Within hours, he was found deceased. In 2022, a federal grand jury indicted Freddy and 2 associates. 2 years later, in September 2024, inside a West Virginia courtroom, Freddy admitted to voluntary manslaughter and assault resulting in serious injury. The judge imposed an additional 25 years. For a man already serving life, the new sentence only locked the door tighter. Today, the name Freddy Gaish sits on the inmate roster at ADX Florence, Colorado, is the Supermax, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In a concrete cell just 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. The low hum of ventilation fans, the heavy slam of electronic locks each time the steel door closes, the echoes of Springfield, the memories of contract killings and the shadow of Bulger, all buried within 4 white walls. Freddy's story is a paradox. He was never a boss, never a high-ranking figure, yet he carved his legacy from a single creed: hatred of informants. From Bruno to Westerman to Bulger, every milestone tied back to the same shadow of betrayal. But in the end, even the coldest assassin is left only with solitude inside the Supermax. For the public, it is a reminder. The Mafia's code of silence may be brutal, but the federal courts deliver the final sentence. And if Freddy Gaish stands as the image of a man who killed for his hatred of informants, the next figure shows another path. A Nuestra Familia leader who turned prison discipline itself into an invisible weapon. Number 13. Cornelio Jesus Tristan, Nuestra Familia. Pelican Bay, California, in the early 2000s. Inside the security housing unit, the concrete walls seemed to cut off every line of contact with the outside world. Yet from that darkness, Cornelio Jesus Tristan and a handful of other leaders still ordered killings, managed drug trafficking, and kept the Nuestra Familia machine running with precision. They were known by a chilling title: the Generals. Tristan grew up in Central California, in a region where Norteños pledged their loyalty to the Red of the Norte gang. He joined Nuestra Familia at a young age and slowly rose into command. Without shouting, without public displays, he controlled through scribbled notes, coded words, and smuggled phone calls. To his peers, Tristan was one of the undeniable voices on the Council of 5 Generals. In April 2001, Operation Black Widow began. The FBI and federal prosecutors followed letters, commissary transfers, and names hidden inside prison intelligence reports. They uncovered a disturbing reality. Even in solitary confinement, the Nuestra Familia leadership, including Tristan, was accused of organizing, collecting funds, and sending out violent orders against anyone who betrayed the group. 3 years later, in September 2004, 8 senior members of NF, including Tristan, stood before a federal court and entered guilty pleas under the RICO statute. Each admitted to at least 2 homicides as part of their plea deal. The press labeled them with 2 words: top generals. By September 2005, the sentences were handed down. Cornelio Tristan, along with James Morado, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, Gerald Rubalcaba, and Tex Marine Hernandez, received federal life sentences. One shocking detail emerged. The state of California, under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, had reduced their state prison terms to allow the federal court to impose harsher punishment and immediately transfer them into federal custody. Soon after, the group became known as the Colorado Five. They were sent to ADX Florence, the Supermax prison designed to sever all chains of command. Their removal from Pelican Bay left a massive power vacuum. Inside Nuestra Familia, subordinates scrambled to rewrite the group's constitution and restructure the organization to survive. Yet loyal members still whispered about the generals exiled to Colorado. Tristan, locked within the white walls of ADX, was believed by some to still influence the outside. Whether true or not, the image of his shadow haunted the Norteños still roaming the streets. Today, federal records confirm Cornelio Jesus Tristan, serving life at ADX Florence. In a concrete cell 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. A small slot opens only to pass a food tray. The sound of locks, the endless drone of ventilation, those are the only reminders of life. Once a man who commanded hundreds, he is now just another solitary inmate trapped in the Rockies. The story of Tristan reflects the harsh reality of Nuestra Familia, an organization with its own constitution, its own generals, its iron discipline. But in the end, every leader must face the weight of federal law. Life sentences, concrete walls, and silence That is the final chapter. Number 14. Joseph Pinky Hernandez, Nuestra Familia, San Jose, California, in the late 1990s. In alleys painted with red graffiti, every Norteño youth knew they were paying taxes to something larger. That something was Nuestra Familia, a violent organization run like a military. And inside the SHU at Pelican Bay, behind concrete walls, one of its most powerful generals was writing orders. His name was Joseph Pinky Hernandez. Hernandez was no outsider. He was one of the 5 highest-ranking leaders, the top generals of NF. From solitary confinement, he directed regiments on the streets. Norteño groups spread across California. Letters and coded symbols carried his violent instructions. Every commissary transfer, every Western Union payment flowed back to the generals. To his followers, Pinky was a final voice of life or death. But in 2001, everything shifted. Operation Black Widow was launched. The FBI and federal prosecutors tracked every move, every coded note, every dollar sent through prison accounts. They uncovered a chilling picture. Even locked inside the SHU, generals like Hernandez were accused of running drug operations, collecting money, and giving orders as if no barriers existed. By September 2004, the hammer fell. 8 senior members of NF, including Pinky, stood before a federal court. All entered guilty pleas under RICO, admitting responsibility for at least 2 homicides each. The press described them with one word: generals. In September 2005, the sentences came down: life in federal prison. But there was one unusual twist. The state of California, under Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, reduced their state sentences to make room for the federal system, allowing harsher punishments. A rare move showing just how dangerous these leaders were considered. Soon after, Hernandez and 4 other top figures were transferred directly to ADX Florence, Colorado, the notorious Supermax where all lines of command are cut off. But the shadow of Pinky did not vanish. In May 2006, his wife, Carolyn Huerta, was documented visiting ADX Florence. She allegedly carried a coded message back to a regiment in Salinas. That same day, a Western Union transfer of $300 was sent to her in Colorado. For the FBI, this was proof that even from the nation's most secure prison, Hernandez was still trying to issue orders. Details like these turned him into the symbol of a haunting question. Can any prison truly sever gang power? Today, federal records list him as Joseph Pinky Hernandez, serving life at ADX Florence. In a concrete cell 6 by 9 feet, he spends 23 hours a day in silence. A narrow slot opens to deliver food. Every phone call, every letter, is under strict surveillance. No more Norteños. No more regiments. Just 4 white walls and a solitary figure waiting out a life without end. For the community, his name remains a reminder. Nuestra Familia once ran like an underground state, with its own constitution, its own generals, its taxes, and its discipline. Joseph Pinky Hernandez was one of its greatest symbols, a man who turned prison into a command post, and who was finally buried inside what they call the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Number 15. Gerald Kuwait Rubalcaba, Nuestra Familia, Pelican Bay, California, in the early 2000s. Inside the SHU, the state's highest security isolation unit, where sunlight filtered through only a narrow slit, a small group of inmates continued to run an empire on the outside. They were the generals of Nuestra Familia, and among them, one name drew special attention from the FBI: Gerald Kuwait Rubalcaba. Rubalcaba was no outsider. He was one of the highest-ranking leaders of NF, standing shoulder to shoulder with Cornelio Tristan, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, James Morado, and Tex Marin Hernandez. From a concrete cell inside Pelican Bay, he still commanded hundreds of Norteños on the streets. A scribbled note, a coded symbol, a message passed through a lawyer, any of these could trigger violent enforcement under gang discipline. In 2001, Operation Black Widow officially began. The FBI and federal prosecutors launched a years-long investigation, tracking prison notes, commissary accounts, and unsolved homicides no one dared to report. The results revealed a chilling truth. Even inside the SHU, supposedly cut off from all contact, NF generals like Rubalcaba were accused of running the organization smoothly, trafficking drugs, and punishing betrayal. By September 2004, Rubalcaba and 7 other defendants stood in federal court. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty under RICO, admitting responsibility for at least 2 homicides carried out under NF. It was a decisive blow, the first time the highest leadership of Nuestra Familia had been pulled fully into the spotlight of federal law. 1 year later, in September 2005, Rubalcaba was sentenced to life in federal prison. Soon after, Rubalcaba and 4 others were transferred directly to ADX Florence, Colorado, the nation's most notorious Supermax. There, all chains of command were cut off. No more letters leaking out. No more secret Western Union payments flowing to regiments. Only a 6 by 9 foot cell, a fluorescent light that never shut off, and 23 silent hours each day. A number replaced a name once feared within Nuestra Familia. The disappearance of Rubalcaba and the Colorado Five left a vast power vacuum. NF leaders rewrote their constitution and reorganized the structure to maintain money and discipline. Yet for many norteños on the streets, the name Cuete lingered like a ghost, a reminder that the violence of that era still echoed, even though he was sealed away in ADX. Today, Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba remains behind the heavy steel doors of ADX Florence. No soldiers, no regiments, no power. Only a solitary inmate, a life bound to Nuestra Familia, ending in a sentence with no return. Number 16, Jeff Fort, Black Pea Stones. Chicago in the late 1960s. On the poverty-stricken streets of the South Side, a skinny teenager named Jeff Fort and his friends formed a small street group. Within just a few years, it grew into a powerful gang. In 1968, Fort appeared before a U.S. Senate committee. For the first time, the nation saw the face of a young leader who used smooth words to mask the violence beneath. Released from prison in 1976 after serving time for misusing federal funds, Fort returned to Chicago with a new plan. He cloaked his gang under the guise of religion, joining the Moorish Science Temple and renaming the Black Pea Stones into El Rukn, which means the pillar. The group maintained a strict hierarchy, discipline, and organized criminal operations, while outwardly presenting itself as a religious community. Their headquarters, an abandoned theater at Drexel and 39th Street, became known as the Fort, a gathering place and command center. By the early 1980s, under Fort's control, El Rukn was no longer just a street gang. It functioned as a structured criminal network, complete with ranks, generals, and its own code of discipline. But federal authorities were closing in. In 1983, Fort was convicted on drug charges and sent back to prison. Yet even behind bars, he continued to issue daily orders, running the group as if walls did not exist. Then, in 1986, an unprecedented case surfaced. Evidence showed Fort and his men had contacted representatives of Libya, arranging a deal for $2.5 million in exchange for carrying out terrorist acts inside the United States. Wiretaps and thousands of hours of recordings documented his coded language and plans. By late 1987, Fort stood in federal court. Judge Charles Norgal, sentencing him to 80 years, declared, "You are clearly the leader of this organization." The press called it one of the first terrorism-related convictions in America. The storm did not end there. In 1988, Fort was again convicted, this time for ordering the murder of a rival gang member back in 1981. That brought an additional 75 years. Combined, the sentences buried him under more than 150 years behind bars. El Rukn soon unraveled under waves of federal prosecutions. Some convictions of his associates were later overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct. But Fort's fate never changed. Even after adopting the name Abdul Malik Kaba when he converted to Islam, his destiny remained fixed. From street gang boss, he became one of the most infamous inmates in the federal system. Today, Jeff Fort is housed at ADX Florence in Colorado, the Supermax prison where the government buries those it deems most dangerous. Inside a 6 by 9 foot cell, under fluorescent lights that never turn off, Fort spends 23 hours a day in silence. His only hour outside is in a small concrete yard, the sky divided by layers of razor wire. The story of Jeff Fort stands as a paradox. From a small group of forgotten teenagers, he built an empire. He wrapped it in religion, even reached out to foreign governments. Yet the path still led to Supermax, where there is no power, no fort, no chance on the south side. Only an aging prisoner, sitting quietly among the rocks of Colorado. Number 17, Perry Rourke, Dead Man Incorporated, Baltimore, in the early 2000s. Inside the yards of the Maryland Department of Corrections, scraps of paper passed hand to hand and whispered conversations gave birth to a new organization. Its name was Dead Man Incorporated, or DMI. And the man at the very top, known by many nicknames, Rock, Pops, Slim, or Saho the Ghost, was Perry Rourke. At first, DMY acted as an extension of the Black Gorilla family. Roark, along with co-founders James Sweeney and Brian Jordan, built a strict chain of command. Members called each other by military ranks, dividing into units across different prisons. Each unit had a commander, lieutenants, and financial officers. In the beginning, DMY mainly served the BGF, striking rivals and clearing the way inside the prison yards. But soon, ambition spread beyond the walls. DMI moved into drug trafficking, extortion, and even drew women on the outside into its network. For over a decade, Rourke was the supreme commander. From a narrow cell, he allegedly issued orders through smuggled phones, contraband passed by visitors, and coded instructions. He directed assaults and targeted those considered traitors. In 2009, one name appeared on his list: Tony Geiger. According to federal prosecutors, Rourke gave the order for his killing from behind bars. By February 2011, the walls closed in. A sweeping RICO case charged 22 DMY members. At the very top of the indictment stood Rourke, described as the supreme leader of the entire organization. A year later, he entered a guilty plea. Court records revealed the machinery in detail, from smuggled prison calls to street-level units, all feeding back to the frail man his followers called Pops. On July 1, 2013, inside a federal courtroom in Baltimore, Rourke heard his final sentence: life in prison. Prosecutor Rod Rosenstein stated plainly as so Rourke would have been released from state prison. But instead, he will spend the rest of his life in federal custody for leading DMY in Jessie and arranging murders. Those words cut off his last hope of freedom, which had been only months away. Judge Richard D. Bennett recommended Rourke be sent to Florence, Colorado, the most notorious prison complex in America. For a man accustomed to running an empire through cracks in the system, this was a sentence that stripped not only freedom, but also his voice. In Florence, every communication is cut. No contraband phones, no Western Union transfers, no street units bowing to orders. In court, Rourke claimed he had renounced DMY. But for federal authorities, those words meant nothing. The network he helped lead fractured in his absence, splitting into factions. Some sought to maintain ties with the BGF, while others veered toward white supremacist ideology. Even behind bars, his shadow continued to haunt. Today, Perry Rourke lives inside the Supermax, a 6 by 9 foot cell, 23 silent hours each day. One remaining hour in a narrow concrete yard, the sky cut into fragments by razor wire. From a man once on the verge of release, he became part of the group subjected to the harshest confinement in the federal system. His story is a paradox. The man once called Pops, the elder guiding younger soldiers, now grows old in the silence of ADX. No more power, no more commands. Only cold silence, where endless days stretch on without end. Number 18. Jessie Chino, Mexican Mafia. February of 2013, at USP Canaan in Pennsylvania. It began like any other gray morning. Heavy steel doors echoed down the corridors. But within minutes, a federal corrections officer was down, and alarms blared across the entire prison. The name spread quickly through the compound. Jessie Conway, known as Chino. Born in 1977 in the Philippines, Conway and his family immigrated to New York. His childhood in Rome, New York, was marked by poverty and gangs. While other kids chose school, Conway chose the streets. By adulthood, he had joined the New Mexican Mafia, a faction connected to but independent from California's La M. Within the gang, Conway was the model soldier, silent, loyal, ready to follow orders. By the early 2000s, he was involved in large drug operations. Federal records show that in 2005, he was sentenced to 11 years for conspiring to distribute cocaine. But his record grew darker. In 2002, in a state case out of Arizona, he was convicted of homicide in the death of Carlos Garcia and sentenced to life without parole. With both state and federal sentences stacked, he was already destined never to leave prison. But the incident at Canaan drove him even deeper into infamy. On February 25, 2013, Conway crossed paths with Officer Eric Williams in a prison hallway. What followed shook the federal system. Cameras recorded everything, leaving no doubt. At trial, his defense attorney admitted, "There's no question Jessie committed the homicide." The only question left was whether he would face death or another life sentence. In 2017, his trial unfolded in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The victim's family sat in the front row, listening to each detail. Security footage was shown to the jury, impossible to dispute. Conwy lowered his head and said, "I wish I could take back what I did, but I cannot." It was not an excuse, but a plea for his life. During sentencing, the jury split. 11 favored the death penalty, but 1 refused. The outcome? Life without parole. That deadlock sparked more than a verdict. It fueled political debate. Lawmakers proposed Eric's Law, which would allow a second jury if the first could not reach a unanimous decision on capital punishment. As a result, Conwy's name became tied not only to prison records but also to American legal history, symbolizing a gap in the sentencing system. After the trial, Conwy was sent to ADX Florence in Colorado, the prison known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In truth, he had already been placed there in 2013, immediately after the attack, to cut off any possibility of further communication or influence. Inside a 6-by-9-foot cell, under cold fluorescent lights 23 hours a day, he lives in near total silence. His single hour outside is spent in a narrow concrete yard, a steel cage covering the sky. No gang, no network, just one man aging in absolute isolation. For the correctional community, the death of Officer Eric Williams is a painful reminder that their profession balances daily on the edge of life and death. For the victim's family, Conwy's life sentence was delayed justice. And for him, ADX Florence became the graveyard of all ambition and every gang title. The name, Chino, is no longer a symbol of the streets or the Arizona prison yards. It is now only a shadow, buried on the roster of men condemned to live out their final days in Supermax silence.